Today's episode is brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Marc Jantzen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between climate consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climate Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climate Consulting. Now, as you will have heard from the start of this episode, and I suspect you may have heard a few times over the previous months if you're a regular listener, we have joined forces with the Consultancy Growth Network and become one of their partners. As you may know from listening to the show, the whole reason I launched Climate Consulting was to help consultancy owners and people on their consultant career to grow, develop, and achieve success, whatever success means to you. And it was this mission that got us talking to Marc and the team at TCGN. And having seen firsthand the fantastic network that they've built, I knew that it would be a great partnership, a great fit, and it has been fantastic working with them so far. For this episode, I wanted to invite Marc on, a consulting entrepreneur and expert in his own right, and having built a fantastic network of consultancies, partners, and advisors, I have heard firsthand his advice and seen the impact that that advice has had. And so I wanted to share that with you and invite him on to talk about all of those challenges that come up time and time again in the Consultancy Growth Network and in the firms that he works with and advises. So for this one, we take a deep dive into exactly that as Marc shares his playbook on how you can scale your consultancy and how you can increase profitability. Ultimately, the two biggest factors for building any successful consulting firm. In this one, we go all the way through everything that you need to know and dig into these challenges to give you tons of practical advice that you can apply to help make 2024 the year that you want it to be for your firm. To give you a taster of what you're about to hear, we talk about the common challenges that Marc sees time and again for consultancies and how you can preempt and overcome them. We talk about proposition and why defining and refining your value proposition could be the most important thing you do to help your consultancy grow. And finally, we talk about bottom line. And Marc explains how he was able to turn £70,000 profit one year into over £700,000 the next, and the lessons that you can apply so that your firm can do the same. If you know Marc or you're familiar with TCGN, you know just how much value you're going to get from this one. If you don't, I hope this gives you a taste of what is about to come, and I really do hope that you enjoy today's conversation. So please have your notebook to hand, get ready to get some fantastic gems that will help your consultancy, and please enjoy my conversation with Marc Jantzen. Marc, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Well, really looking forward to this. Obviously, we've got to know each other very well over the last year with Create Engage becoming part of the Consultancy Growth Network. People listening to this right now have probably heard the ad for the Consultancy Growth Network right at the start. So hopefully they know who you are. But for those who maybe don't, or for those naughty people who skip past the ad, could you give a bit of background on your career and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I trained originally with Pricewaterhouse as a chartered accountant. Left fairly promptly after qualifying and joined, what was an equally prestigious brand, I thought, PepsiCo, only to find that I was going to be working in KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and joined the head office there as a sort of like an operational support guy. So I got out of accountancy straight away and then went down to run a region of restaurants for KFC, which was a baptism of fire. And then, the obvious jump to join my sister, who decided to set up a consulting business called Blue Sky. She was about 9 months, a year in. And I joined Blue Sky. I was there 17 years. We sold Blue Sky to Capita back in 2013, almost 10 years ago. And following that, I went on to provide sort of, I guess, be a freelance advisor really to other consulting businesses, other consultancy owners. And more recently, 3-4 years ago now, I started the Consultancy Growth Network.
Well, a very concise overview. I did not know about KFCs.
Did you not?
I did not. That was
the best bit.
I can imagine. I don't usually, I always like things I didn't know about. What was the best part of running KFC restaurants? That feels like quite a shift from being an accountant at PwC.
Yeah. Well, obviously being able to eat the food, I was very proud of an office that I had above a restaurant, and I actually ate the food at least 2, if not 3 times a week, can you believe? But it was, an opportunity to lead a team of 200 people across 13 restaurants, 9 million revenue, and had my own little business unit. And because we were down in the West Country, I think when I went down there the first time to take over as the sort of district or regional manager, my boss didn't turn up in the region for 3 months. And so I was just left to my own devices. I was reading the 1 Minute Manager, I remember, which was fantastic. I recommend it to those of you who hadn't read it. And yeah, that was my first leadership role, really.
Maybe we start with obviously people have heard about what the Consultancy Growth Network is from the ad at the start of this, and members will know it. But could you start with actually what the network is and maybe lead into why you decided to, having built and sold your own business, having a very comfortable advisory career, why you decided it's time to jump into something new?
Yeah, sure. So it's really simple. It's a community specifically for leaders of consulting firms, essentially. So if you have an ambition to grow your consulting firm and you probably haven't done it before, then what a great opportunity to connect with other people who are on that journey as well, but also to get access to experts that have traveled that path, been there, bought the t-shirt. So we have a team of what we call our growth experts. So there's 8 of us that have all built and sold consulting firm between 10 and 30 million. And the thinking from those people sort of feeds the agenda, if you like, for the network. And we run about 30 events a year, 4 big face-to-face events, and then a whole range of online forums and learning opportunities to try and bring those teams on and help them achieve their ambitions. So that's really what the goal, I guess the sort of strapline is, we're looking to be a one-stop shop for consultancy leaders to fulfill their ambitions. That's really what it's about.
And the second half, and maybe the obvious question, the why, I mean, to your point, when you describe it, it makes a lot of sense. I'm conscious you probably started that in a world where networks were a thing. I know Daniel Priestley, and he's got his network. There's lots of other business networks. Why did you decide to create one specifically for consulting when, there's plenty of, I guess, SME networks already in existence?
Yeah. I do think building a consulting business is really challenging. I also think it's quite unique. And I went myself to other networks, and you end up sitting next to someone who's maybe running a restaurant chain or a logistics business. And frankly, the similarities just aren't there, and they're not facing the similar challenges. Broadly, you can talk about maybe leadership and people stuff, but B2B marketing, very different, driving profitability, very different. So I was doing the advisory sort of role, and essentially I was repeating myself because, surprise, surprise, people were experiencing similar challenges, right? So within the consulting world, there are some core challenges that we all need to overcome. And there was nothing really there. So it was a gap. And well, I'll tell the story maybe further on in terms of how I came up with the idea, but I think the why for me is really clear. It's a tough gig, and why make it up as you go along?
I mean, when you put it like that, Mark, it makes a lot of sense. And to your point, I think the how is interesting, but I do want to start with what you touched on there, those challenges. And you mentioned you're seeing them time and again with your advisory clients. It's why you start the network. What are those big challenges that you see consulting boutique founders, owners, partners face? And then I think we can start to dive into and dissect each one of those.
So contextually, one of the kind of, particularly the early days, one of the big challenges that people tend to start a consulting business based on a set of competencies or skills or experience that they have. And they say, right, okay, I want to take those skills out to the market and offer those skills out, as opposed to, a classic entrepreneur would be looking at the market going, what's the gap that I'm trying to fill, and what service or product am I going to build to close that gap? And what typically happens is consulting entrepreneurs will then take their skills out to market. They'll do a good job. They're smart people. The client will like them, and then they'll give them other jobs to do. And before you know it, they're doing a really wide range of different services. I know for us at Blue Sky, I think 2-3 years in, we had something like 26 service lines of things that we would put on the back of our brochure, a physical hard copy brochure in those days, listing out all these things that we could do for you. And that just sets people off on the wrong path, frankly. And so the big challenge that people face in the early days is, how do they articulate their value proposition, and how do they articulate how and why people should buy from them, and how they're different to other people in the market? So that would be one major challenge. Many other challenges around the fact that, people are your product. People are generally a bit unreliable. They're very variable. They're not consistent. And so building and scaling a business that's so dependent on people is really challenging. And one, that is also tends to be quite dependent on the owner. So, most businesses, you take a manufacturing business, you wouldn't expect to see the CEO in the factory actually being involved in the manufacturing process. But of course, in the consulting business, the CEO is often involved in developing the intellectual property, or having a sales conversation, or overseeing a client. The danger is they're very involved in all of that. So it's, again, different challenge, different business type. Yeah.
I mean, that value proposition piece, I find fascinating, partly because it's what we help clients with at Create Engage, but also because, to your point, so often it's the thing that stops people being able to scale their consultancy. You touched on when you started consultancy. Is that unique to people who've just started out, or is that something you see across the spectrum? And if it is across the spectrum, how does that differ?
Surprisingly, it can stay with a consulting firm for quite a long time. And I've seen businesses that are turning over 10, even 15 million, and they're struggling to articulate what their value proposition is. And as a result, they struggle, and it's difficult working with you, Nick, because then they don't know how to go to market, right? Because if they can't articulate it, you've got nothing to work with. And again, because people have networks and they will grow their business through those networks, working in potentially different industry sectors, doing different types of projects, your world's your oyster in terms of, you could pick anything in terms of what they could go out to market with. So yeah, it's a problem. And it's even if you articulate and you sort it out in year 3 or year 5, it can still come back to bite you in year 8 or year 10, because things change and you build more services. And before you know it, you find yourself, your team are confused again, and you haven't got that clarity.
You led into it there, but it raises that question of, why is it a problem? So you mentioned, at Blue Sky, you had these 26 service lines. If I was listening, I might think, well, Mark, that's great, because I've got 26 different products, to your manufacturing. Pepsi had all of these different brands. They're making more money. Why doesn't that work for consultancies? So
lots of reasons. And to give a few, you want to be able to build real capability in your business. And you can't, as a small business with, say, 30, 40 people, you can't build capability across 26 service lines. You can't be the best in the world at 26. You're going to struggle to be the best in the world at 1. So I think the key thing is, once you've gone beyond your network and you want to scale your business, and you need to go out to market and actually, make a song and dance about what it is you've got to offer and how different you are and the value you bring, it needs to be focused. It needs to be a clear message, and it needs to deliver compelling value to that prospect. And so that demands, in my view, the need to focus in on fewer propositions, ideally in fewer sectors, targeting fewer prospects with similar challenges.
That problem, the way you've described it there, if I was listening to this and I was 5 to 10 people, smaller boutique, I would think, although I know it's not always true, that's quite easy to solve. So say, take your example. If I've come out of, I don't know, a water company and I'm a project manager, I know from firms we've spoken to, from firms I've seen in the market, when you get to that 10 to 15 million, you might have multiple partners or multiple different service lines. And actually, does that make it harder to coalesce? And how have you seen people being able to overcome that issue of, well, if we've got 10 partners each selling 10 things, how do we get them to agree that we're only going to sell 3 things?
Yeah, I mean, I think context really matters here. So there's not a fixed answer, although I would point people towards, there's a great book by, what was his name, Colin Price, ex-McKinsey partner, wrote a book called Accelerating Performance, something like that. Beyond Performance was the first one, and then Accelerate Performance was the second one. And there's a great clip on YouTube. He did a session on the highest performing organizations, and he looked at the number of products and services those high performing organizations had. And I won't give you the answers on here, but go and check it out on the YouTube clip. But I can tell you now that the successful businesses that were consistently growing, consistently profitable, had massively fewer products and services than those that were not performing as well. So it works at big corporate level as much as it works for me at small and medium-sized consulting firms.
And for people who want to do this, how do you recommend people do that? Is it just get all the partners in a room and fight it out until you only have 3? Is it look at profitability? Is it look at revenue? Kind of how have you seen that work? And maybe, I don't know, how you mentioned with Blue Sky, you had 26. I mean, maybe that's a good example. Kind of how did you smash that down to however many you did?
Yeah, we took that down to 4. So in terms of the how, I'd say the first step is to establish the criteria that you're going to use to make that decision. And I think it's important that, so for example, is there strong market demand for that particular service line? Have you got a track record and a good case history of being able to demonstrate value in that space? Do you have the capability to scale it? Can you train people to do it? But also, are you passionate about it? Is it something you're interested in? And do you want to do it? So, and you may take a risk on a few service lines, that meet some of those criteria and maybe not some of the others. So I think the way I've done it with clients is we establish our criteria, we weight those criteria, and then we score the different service lines, the different sectors. And as a result, we then test, we make a decision and go, okay, we think these 3 are the primary ones that we're going to go after, and then let's test it. So let's come up with some compelling propositions, go to market and see how we do. Because it's not easy going to market with multiple propositions and multiple sector targets, simultaneously. You're probably going to phase that anyway.
I guess your last point there, why do a lot of consulting firms have lots of propositions? It's so that you can be a Swiss Army knife. So, if I come into your office, Marc, as a client, I can sell you IT transformation or operating model. Do you ever find that's a challenge that the firms you've worked with have kind of had to overcome? That, I am going to put my colors to, or pin my colors to a mast? Because I think that almost feels like the last bit of your process, but also the biggest blocker potentially.
Yeah. So the key distinction here, I think, is the difference between proactive and reactive. So I would argue that you pin your colors to the mast on a certain proposition or 2 or 3 propositions in 2 or 3 sectors, not loads of sectors and loads of propositions. So you go narrow in terms of where you're going to invest your marketing time and energy and building your capability. However, it doesn't mean that you can't be reactive in a scenario and have a set of qualifying criteria that say, well, actually, if this opportunity comes along, it's not bang in our sweet spot, but it is something we have the capability to do. It's not going to take resources away from our core stuff. It's not going to stop us from continuing to grow and scale in the direction we're going in, but it's going to fund other things. It's going to be profitable. Then go ahead and do it, right? So you can be reactive, but then don't all of a sudden slap it on your website and go, we're the experts at this now, and we're now, promoting this proposition. Build it up, do it 2 or 3 times in a reactive way. If people keep knocking on the door and asking for that, then chances are that maybe it is worth putting some resource behind it and developing a new service line and taking that to market. So that's how I think you can balance the desire to want to do lots of different things, because people are motivated often by the variety, but also developing and growing something that has the potential to scale and ultimately create some value in your business, if that's what you're hoping to do.
I think that proactive reactive is a great point, Marc, because like you say, it's not excluding it forever. Yeah. It's more about what you are going out with. And then, yes, if, ultimately, if the client thinks, well, Marc, you can help me with this as well, and the criteria you just said are met, why wouldn't you? You made that point around we make criteria, in a good consulting way, we have criteria, we tick against them and we see what comes out. With either Blue Sky or some of those businesses you've worked with, has that ever led to a surprising result? And if so, kind of how did the team or how did you kind of come to terms with that?
Well, yes, a few times. And particularly by doing the back analysis. So one of the exercises we do is we look at the last 3 years' revenue and we look at it by sector and we look at it by proposition. And then you quantify, where are you making your most money? And obviously look at it from a revenue and a profit perspective. And sometimes the owners hadn't really clocked onto the fact that there was a really strong theme in that revenue. And where maybe they've been articulating themselves as change management, transformation, now all of a sudden they realize that actually really where their focus has been and where they've got great credentials is digital transformation within the retail and FMCG sector, or and all of a sudden you've got something that has a little bit more teeth. So yeah, we've had a few occasions where, because again, people are just focusing on the next project and the next deal, and they maybe haven't done that retrospective analysis. So it's very, very much worth doing.
And with Blue Sky, that 26 down to 4, were any of the ones that you lost, did that cause any tensions with yourself, with your sister, with the rest of the leadership team? And I asked that more a bit to what we've just touched on, to help if someone here is thinking, well, I want to do that, but I don't want it to be my service that we lose. Did you have any tensions in those conversations? And I guess, how did you overcome them? Was it back to the spreadsheet, or was there something else that helped with that?
There were certainly people that were wedded to certain propositions. And that's where the proactive play came in, to say, look, we don't think this is central to our future growth. So therefore, we're not going to go out and promote it. But, if clients start asking for it or continue to ask for it and work comes in, then we'll do the work and you can continue to do the work. But yeah, I don't remember any major tensions. I think we had a slightly different topic. We had more tensions around when we looked to restructure the business away from service lines to sectors. That was more challenging. So it's kind of related.
Consultancies, as we both know, usually go vertical or horizontal in terms of go-to-market, won't they? And actually, just because you mentioned it there, what was that shift like? Because that is a big shift from going, well, I do change management across the board, to we're just working in FMCG. Obviously, it wasn't your example, but yeah, bring that to life, because I'd love to know about that.
Well, that was quite painful. And I don't know if she's listening, but one of my senior directors was very passionate about customer service transformation, which was a core part of what we did. And she wasn't really that interested in sales transformation or cultural transformation, which were the other two kind of lead propositions. And the fourth was executive coaching. So yeah, the conversation went along the lines of, this is the structure that we are moving towards because we believe it's right for our clients and right for our future growth. And essentially, if you want to be a senior player in the business, then you need to embrace other propositions and become a practice leader. And initially it was kicking and screaming, I think it's fair to say, but she did embrace it after some time, and she needed to get immersed in those other propositions to become as passionate as she was about the customer service transformation. But she was successful. She went on to become the MD after I left. So
it obviously worked out for her and for the business. The answer may be what you just described. But why did you make that move? Why did you go from horizontals to verticals?
So as we grew, we were finding it more and more difficult to cross-sell within our clients, because obviously as partners, we weren't necessarily involved in our clients anymore as much. And so then you had a scenario where we could be working for British Gas as a major client. And of course, they could buy customer service transformation, sales transformation, and leadership and cultural transformation, everything, right? They don't want to talk to 4 different service line leads. They want to talk to one primary practice lead who understands their sector and ideally understands those propositions. So that was the primary reason why was client driven. The other benefit was internal ownership. So we could then break our business into smaller profit and loss accounts so that a practice leader could own the profit and loss account for the financial services practice, for example, and be responsible for growing existing accounts and winning new revenue and building the capability and the intellectual property and the thought leadership associated with the financial services team and driving the marketing campaign. So there was, it provided great clarity. And I thank Paul Collins for that, who was my mentor at the time, who We had many conversations, and I resisted for many, many years to make that move, because once you're wedded to service line, capability, and that's how you've structured your business, it is tough to make the move. But I have to say that was one of the transformational decisions that we made a real difference.
Help me understand. So you mentioned you chose to be vertically aligned for P&L ownership. And this may be a naive question or not, is why could you not do that horizontally aligned? Why could you not have I understand what you mean around having 4 partners, not one, but why couldn't I have the P&L for sales transformation? Why did I have to have the P&L for financial services?
Technically, you could. So let's not forget that. So the primary reason we did it was from a client perspective. The secondary reason was around P&L ownership. So if someone was owning a sales transformation profit and loss, they are going to be working in the same clients as the people running the customer service transformation, the leadership transformation, potentially lots of crossover, right? So the question is then, who owns the client? Whose responsibility is it to grow the account overall versus grow just the sales transformation aspect of it? So that, it gets messy, it gets really messy. And because ultimately a lot of functions had both sales and service functions within it, and of course they had leaders within there. So yeah, it was a lot more straightforward.
That was what I thought the answer might be. And to your point, it kind of, I imagine, saves lots of internal politicking over who owns the revenue. To your point, is it customer service? Is it sales? It's much easier in that way to have client ownership. Help me as well, because this will be relevant for our listeners. How big were you when you made that shift?
I would say we're probably around the 4 to 5 million.
Okay. And that's useful as well, because when people start to hear verticals, horizontals, you think to like you mentioned PwC, the Accentures, where you're like, these are big firms. Obviously, you made that shift at that sort of 5 million mark. And I do want to come back to your point around there's firms who are at 10, 15 who don't know their proposition. You were obviously very deliberate about it. Why was that the time to do it? Why was Paul telling you to do it at that point? Was it specifically to then, or was it because of when you had met Paul and that relationship you'd built there?
I think it was also part of lifting me out of the business, in the sense that so that I could focus on working on the business rather than in it. That was a big part of it. And so in order to be able to delegate responsibility more clearly and have that level of ownership, and also to scale the sort of sector teams, those were the primary reasons. It was probably overdue. Ideally we would have probably started like that. So yeah, and as I say, I deferred it for several years because I knew it was going to be painful. So we probably should have done it sooner.
Well, then I think that point around the on your business, not in your business, and I know it's something you talked about at the summit. I guess answer this whichever way is most helpful. Is either how did you do that, or how do you advise people to do that? Because that does seem in our industry a challenge, where if you are the product and you have started your business, you are also the quality, it can sometimes be quite hard to step back in that way. It's not, it's not a production line like the KFCs you ran.
So I was very bad at it originally. And if I'm honest, I didn't really know what it looked like, because in a consulting business, value comes from selling work and delivering work and having clients say you're wonderful, right? So that's where you're adding value. In terms of being able to work on the business, there's a well-known phrase, grinding, minding, finding, as a sort of structure. You need to get yourself out of the grinding, out of the doing. You need to get yourself out of the managing, and then ultimately get yourself out of the selling. And once you're out of those 3 primary aspects, you're in a position to start to work on the business. And that might not be 100% of the time, obviously. David Bailey always quotes to me that I think is one of the Accenture managing partners that still has a 50% billable target or something crazy. How he manages that, I have no idea. It's clearly superhuman. But in a small business, I found it really transformational to be able to have time to take a step back, to be able to coach members of your team, but not be directly responsible for client work and not be directly responsible for driving that pipeline. In the latter years, I would get involved where the deals were sort of £1 million plus. But you're still there in support of the team who are selling that piece of work or overseeing that piece of work. So yeah, it's a case of getting out of the deliverables, I guess, in short.
And to the point in your journey where you did it, and is there a kind of well-trodden at X number of people or X million revenue you can do that? Or actually should that be someone's goal from day dot? If someone's listening to this and they're, I don't know, 1 million or 5 million or 10 million, should they already be doing it? Are they too early? Like, how do you guide people on that?
So again, depends on your ambition and what you want. Some people want to be a consultant, want to do the work, and that's what motivates them and that's what enjoys them. If you want to go the quickest path to growth and value, I mean, one example would, I think Tony from Next Wave.
I've had it. I was actually about to mention him before you did. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, he made a decision when he started Next Wave that he would not sell or deliver anything. And that is crystal clear. And as a result, he's built a team around him who can sell and deliver and has seen phenomenal success in a very short period of time. So I think that, that's your answer.
Well, I think, Tony, and he did share that sort of his version of the journey on the show. And to your point, it's worked phenomenally well. I think they've had something like a 200 or 300% compound growth rate, 13th, I think it was 13th fastest growing firm in the UK, which is quite insane. There's an interesting group in this, though. To your point of it depends what you want to do. What if you are someone who wants to sell and you've got you've built a business, suddenly you find yourself at that 10, let's say 10 million, just for round numbers, and you're like, well, actually I do need to get out of that work. How should people do that? Is it just building a team around you? Is there kind of structured steps they can take? Because I guess you've got that, to use one of those consulting cliches, you're flying the plane, you're trying to build it, and then you're now trying to train someone else to pilot it. Actually, how can people make that time to even be able to step out to do all of those things so they can step out, if that makes sense?
So for me, it really comes down to coaching, essentially. For me, that's the fundamental skill as a leader. And I think I was reasonably comfortable in that space as a coach, comfortable delegating responsibility, empowering people, letting them take risks, letting them make mistakes, but also being there to support them and help them prep. I mean, so in the days where I was trying to transition work to my senior team, I would be there with Lindsay, for example, before a sales meeting. We'd be having a conversation before the sales meeting, going through all the prep, making sure she's fully ready to go. And then she'd go and do the meeting, and then she'd come back and tell me all how it went, and then we'd analyze it, and we'd get a full 360 conversation. And we'd do that repeatedly, such that, we were honing that skill. And then, after a certain amount of time, we're in a place where I don't need to have that conversation anymore because she's coming fully prepped. She knows exactly what she's doing, and it's working. And similarly for those that are running major clients, presenting back diagnostic findings, all of the key meetings. For me, it's all about coaching. And I'm not sure how else you get there. I'm sure other people have got there other ways, but for me, that's what it's all about.
Well, and I think that example is a really good one as well that is a process you've described. The first meeting you sent Lindsay off to, what did that look like in terms of, was that just more coaching ahead of it? I guess what I'm trying to get to is, at some point in there, you've got to do the first one. And with the first one comes risk. Take Lindsay's off to a sales meeting. If she doesn't do that as well as you could, she might lose you the business. I'm painting a very dour picture, but how do you get people comfortable with that first turn? Because as soon as you go once, you can keep going.
Yeah, it's a progressive thing. So we would go to meetings together, and initially I would run the meeting and she would take notes, and then you move bit by bit. Then she would open the meeting and maybe ask the questions, and I would maybe do the presentation, or the other way around. And so you'd hand over bits of the meeting, and we'd get to a point where she would do the entire meeting and I would hardly say anything in the room, but I would be there so that if anything came up that she wasn't sure about, or a client asked a tricky question that, then I was there in support. So actually when she went off to do it on her own, she felt pretty comfortable because she'd led it end to end.
A kind of see one, do one, coach one type structure.
Yeah. I mean, it was probably more than one of each, but because they're all different, aren't they? And they're complex. And we did have high standards. We did want to convert a high proportion of those opportunities. And so, preparation was the key for me, and progression. But, she's also a very talented lady. That's what helps.
And the other side, just because you mentioned it was a client conversation as an example, just thinking about things others might ask, internally that makes sense, kind of the coaching, the building up someone's capability. As you were taking that step away, did you have to do anything specifically with clients to get them comfortable? Because again, if I'm thinking about boutique consulting founders and owners I know, there is that natural tension. If you have always been the face they've seen, they may always want your face. actually, did you have to take any steps to kind of go, well, no, actually, Lindsay's just as good. You're in safe hands.
Yeah, 100%. And you need to create opportunities for your team to look good and opportunities for them to educate the client and for the client to learn from your team, not from you. And, you may have come up with the idea, you may have done the thinking, but you feed the thinking and the idea to your team member, and they get to look good and they get to build that level of rapport. And you're able to then walk out of the meeting and have a little chat with the client saying, blimey, yeah, she's good, isn't she? Yeah. Right, great. Yeah, well, look, you don't need me anymore. Clearly, so again, it's a progressive thing. And yeah, if you're determined to do it, and you need to put your ego to one side and avoid, the need to look good in front of the client and focus on your team looking good. And starting the conversation in that way as well is really important. So you're setting the expectation, in new engagements is easy. So you set the expectation in terms of what your role is as managing director. You will be there in the background. You'll be, available as an escalation point should that be necessary, but you're not expecting it to be the case because your team are more than capable.
I love that phrasing, Mark, and that kind of giving your team that opportunity to shine. And even if you're involved in the background, like you say, it's what the client sees that matters, isn't it? It's I'm sure I wouldn't want to see what was going on in the back of a KFC, but you like what comes out in the bucket, or if that is the meals you enjoy. But how do you make sure you get the right people? Again, to the scale, so you've talked about, well, you can take that step back, you've put your verticals in. Actually, what are those common challenges that you find hold consultancies back from a people perspective? Because in some ways, consulting is really easy. Like, you just copy the big four. I'm being really simplistic. But actually, people are human, their own drivers, motivators, etc. Kind of what are some of those either challenges you had or the challenges you've seen time and again that kind of hold consultancies back?
So many.
So we've probably got a whole podcast on people.
And you know what? I almost feel, so I have a few rules in my head in terms of things I look for. And I would say recruitment is not necessarily my forte, let's say. Which is, fortunately, it was Miranda's forte, and Miranda took care of it when we were at Blue Sky and did a very good job. The things that were important to me were, I needed people that were prepared to have a conversation and take feedback and be receptive, and not just receptive, but proactive about wanting that coaching, because they could come in with all sorts of wonderful experience. But we found time and time again that people still had an awful lot to learn. And so if they're receptive and they learn quickly, then you can usually get over most things. And so it was how you test that. And we used to test it through, obviously, you put them through an assessment process, and then we would find an opportunity to give them some constructive feedback. And then we would observe how they reacted to that constructive feedback, because we really wanted to sort of, put them under a bit of pressure, make them feel uncomfortable, frankly, and see how they handled it.
Because I love this, can you bring that to life? What did that, it was that you gave them a presentation and then the feedback was actually this bit wasn't great. Like,
absolutely. Yeah. And with a straight face, thank you very much for the presentation. I've got to be honest, you lost me a little bit at this point. I really did not know what you were trying to say, where you were going with it. And you're going to have to help me out, because I was, or something, direct. And, would you really finish a meeting like that? Just to challenge them around and to see how they respond and whether they get emotional and how they handle it. Because let's be honest, client situations can be challenging, and you can be on tight deadlines. You can be working with a team late into the night, and you need people that can handle it.
And just because you gave those two examples there, were there sort of stock feedbacks you always gave, or were they always contextual to the...
Look, at the end of the day, the test is going to be hard enough that people aren't going to do it perfectly. So there was always an opportunity to be able to say, yeah, there were a few things I think that you could have improved. Well, I would always ask them first, what could you have done better? What could you have done differently, to see if they had the awareness of where they could have done better. So that was the first test. And then if they didn't, then obviously we'd point it out and see how they reacted.
And I'm making a note, Mark, because that's going straight in our own recruitment process. I guess, and you might just say these weren't the people who passed. How did you strike that balance between, to your point, testing that direct feedback versus, I guess, causing someone just to think they'd failed the interview and collapsed? Because an interview is quite, pressure, to your point, high pressure. In some ways, it's more pressured than a client meeting, because client meetings are never usually do or die, whereas an interview is. Were there any learnings in that respect, or was your view that actually if you crumble, well, you're going to crumble in a client meeting, so you're not right for here?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I mean, look, we weren't brutal. It was always delivered in a nice way, but in a clear and direct way. And so we're not looking to be mean, but equally, just looking to be.
Wasn't drill sergeant from the army. Type stuff.
And to some degree, I always wanted to create a culture where people could speak as directly to me as I could to them. I certainly know that I had that at Blue Sky. I think for a large part, there were certainly phases maybe where it wasn't the case. And in my team right now at the Growth Network, I mean, the amount of feedback they give me and the amount that they seem to take the piss out of me. I'm allowed to say that, but I think they feel fairly comfortable about pointing out when I get things wrong. So I think that's great.
Well, and because you've openly shared it there, and I think it's a really interesting piece for our listeners as well. You touched on, you had that balance sometimes, and sometimes you either lost it or you felt you needed to get back to it. Just so was that you didn't feel you could talk to the team, or the team didn't feel they could talk to you?
I mean, that is a whole other story that I'm not sure we want to go into. We did go into it in quite a bit of detail, actually, when I did the podcast with Daniel Priestley. There was another leader in the business. We were partners, and let's just say we weren't culturally aligned. And there was a little bit of a divide between his team and my team. And that was the period where, things didn't go quite so well.
Fine. We won't unpack that here. If people want to listen, they can listen on Daniel's podcast. To your test there of, you want someone who can handle direct feedback and give direct feedback to you. Obviously, there is a kind of spectrum. You mentioned the cultural values as well. So someone needs to be able to give direct, if it's a Venn diagram, they need to be able to give direct feedback and have that cultural alignment. What is in your recruitment process that test to make sure that someone isn't just a dick? Because dicks can be very direct, can take feedback on, but can be very rude back. What's that almost counterbalance for you? Maybe how have you applied it in the Consultancy Growth Network to make sure that your team have that, fun energy that I know they all do, but are also direct? Because that's quite an unusual combination.
Yeah. So we used to kind of ensure that one of the junior members of the team would go and greet the candidate and take them to the meeting room where the interview was going to take place. And then they would feed back on their experience of that person and the degree to which they bothered to build a rapport. Knowing that this isn't the person that's going to be interviewing me. They don't really matter if that's their attitude, or actually they really engage and they start asking questions. How long have you been here? And what's it like? And all this kind of stuff. So that was one of the key things that, because again, I learned this actually from one of Richard Branson's sort of things that he looked for was people that were others orientated. So, and I think that again that matters, because in consultancies you have to work as a team to be effective, both with the client and with your internal team. So to make sure they weren't a dick. We had other little tests around that sort of thing. And we would take people out socially as well before we hired them, if, at the final stage. And then they would get to mingle with over a beer, and usually people loosen up a little bit then, and you get to know hopefully the real person, not just the act. It's tough though, isn't it? Let's be honest. It is tough when you're recruiting to make sure you're getting behind the skin of and finding out who you're really hiring.
So, and that's why I dig into it, because I think, if I think of people I know in the industry, recruiting is always that challenge, and particularly in consulting, where part of the role is being able to present a face, if you like. How you behave with clients is always different based on them, and actually that can make it quite hard to see through what is front versus what is real. And I love your example of the feedback is definitely what I'm going to use for myself, but your one around actually how people speak to juniors, how they, act with a beer, it's all those little things. It's James O'Sullivan from Project One. He came on the show and he kind of said, any bad thing you see, multiply by 1,000, and that's in real life. And, that I think is a really good bit of advice as you're interviewing people. Sorry, were you going to?
Well, I was just going to say, I think the other thing, I recognize that it's not my forte, right? So I think it's important to have good people around you that are good at it. And at Blue Sky, Miranda was great at it. Now I'm lucky enough to be in partnership with Caroline Boston at New Minds, and Caroline and her team are excellent at it. So we can lean on her and her team, when we're hiring for the Growth Network. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of finding people who know what they're doing in that regard.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you say, know your skills and build the team around that. And actually, how do you take stock of the team you have versus the team you may need at a certain size? Because again, you might start a business with someone, or you might hire someone who's brilliant when you're a 5-person, but when you're a 50-person, they aren't there. And that, I imagine, is the hardest. It's easy to lose underperformers. It's really hard if you've got someone who was a great performer and they're just, they were great when you were the 3rd division, but now you're the Premiership, they're not cutting it. Again, how have you seen, or how do you advise people to kind of take stock and manage that?
I think that is really tough. And like you say, people who are there at the beginning for a certain set of reasons, and either, they just don't fit, or they can't perform in the new context. And typically it comes as you start to need to put in more process and more accountability, more measurement, more reporting, more visibility. Yeah, we certainly had that. And I think someone who I would consider to be a very good friend, was 13 years in the business and started on the same day as me, a year into the business. And, as the years went by, it just wasn't working for him, and it was very difficult. But I'm pleased to say that, he and one of my team, who was, his boss at the time, had a great conversation, and he became an associate and a contractor to the business, and went on to add value and continue to have a career with us, but just in a different shape. I was worried about that at the time as to how that would work out, and I think it worked out really well. So it can be done, but I think it's very personal and very individual dependent.
Yeah, and like I said, your example there showed when it's handled well, it can work very well. Is this one of those things that just becomes obvious to people, or is it something that you as the leader of a business should always be looking for? Do you find in those businesses you've worked with, like, they know who it is who's just not keeping pace, or is actually that sometimes one of the things that's actually holding their whole business back, they just haven't identified?
Well, I think of one client that I've been an advisor to for several years now, had someone working for them who wasn't performing. And I think what got in the way of that, as an example, was really just the personal relationship. And the owner's a really nice guy and was quite forgiving, And of course, as a sort of in a like a non-exec role, I'm able to play bad cop occasionally and say, well, how long are you going to let this person not deliver for? They're costing you money. They're not making you any money. And the trouble with that, it's not just the money side of it, but it's the impact that it has on the rest of the team. Inevitably, if there's one person not pulling their weight, it's just not fair on the rest of the team. And it also, so therefore it undermines you as a leader and gets in the way of any ambition that you can have to create something that's really quite special and making a real difference. So yeah, I think it's very common. It's very common, and typically underperformance is fairly easy to see. In a consulting business, you're pretty well exposed. If you're responsible for bringing work in and you're not, if you're responsible for managing clients and they're not happy, then we all know about it.
One topic I said I would bring us back to, Mark, and I mentioned obviously Paul at the Consultancy Growth Network's annual summit. He made the point around not building a business as a partnership, so an LLP. Obviously, with that desire to sell, a number of members, a number of business I know, they're set up as limited companies. Paul Collins obviously made the point that that's the best way to do it. I tease that because I know obviously with Blue Sky, you were a partnership. And when we spoke ahead of this, you mentioned that actually being a partnership was a real benefit in your story. So I'd love to maybe open sort of this topic up with why was it a benefit to you? And actually, if you're giving advice to either members or firms you work with, kind of what should they consider? Because changing is hard and you should probably start in one way or t'other. Why did you find partnerships so beneficial to your business?
So the primary reason is just a really practical one, which is flexibility. So, and that's flexibility around bringing partners in and partners leaving. So during the course of our 17-year journey at Blue Sky, we had 7 partners, I think, overall. The start, there was predominantly the 3 of us, Elka, Liz, and myself, for pretty much the first 10 years. And then for the next 7 years, we had several people come and go. And at the end, it was just myself and Elka. Now, if we'd have been a limited company, bringing on those partners and exiting them would have created tax events on each occasion. They would have had to buy in, or we'd have had to put thresholds in place. We'd have had to get legal advice. adapt the shareholders agreement, deal with company's house, all of that business administration stuff that has no value to your business and takes time and money. Whereas we were able to just make a decision to say, you want to go off or go part-time, or you want to take a maternity leave, or you want to reduce your responsibilities, right? Well, we can reduce your shareholding, we can reduce your salary, we can do whatever we want, frankly, from whatever date that we want. And there are no tax implications. So that was the primary area of flexibility. The downside of being a partnership is if your business makes a profit, regardless of whether you take the money out, you pay dividend income tax on that, right? Or income tax, I should say, on that money. And as you grow, clearly your business needs more working capital. So you need to leave money in, but you still have to pay tax on the money that you're leaving in. So that's a downside of being a partnership. Whereas in a limited company, obviously you pay your corporation tax, but you only pay dividend income tax if you distribute the funds. So again, as is often the case with these questions, the answer is it depends on your ambition and your direction. So if, for example, like one of our growth experts who kind of was on a path to grow and sell and reinvested all the way along, didn't really distribute any money along that sort of 10-year journey, and at the end had the big sale and made a big chunk of money, it made sense to be a limited company. Otherwise, you'd have been really struggling to pay all that tax as a partner, right? Whereas if you've got people coming and going within the partnership and you can afford to cover that tax, then the increased flexibility for me is a massive bonus. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And well, I guess there's an interesting part to obviously your journey. You were a partnership which had the flexibility, but you were also growing quickly and grew to a size where you probably needed some working capital. How did you square that circle? Because to your point, if you're paying income tax, which is much larger than corporation tax, and when you were running Blue Sky would have been much, much larger before they changed it. Yeah, how did you have that working capital?
We just paid ourselves less. Yeah. And we had to leave the money in to fund the working capital. But we did it knowing that we were funding a growing business. And therefore we felt comfortable doing it. But yeah, there were certainly times where we could have all been grateful to take more money out of the business and cover the school fees, etc. But yeah, the business needed. But what it also did was drive us to, bring in some best practice around invoice policies and cash flow management, and really making sure that we were getting paid as early as possible, as much as upfront as possible, to fund the business, so that we weren't having to fund the working capital as much ourselves.
When you say that, it makes a lot of sense, Mark. And I guess, well, what do you see in the members? Because I obviously know some of the firm names. I don't know whether they have LTD or LLP at the end. What is the split? Is it more
80-20 limited companies? I mean, that is the default, I think, for the vast majority of people. And I still think limited liability partnerships are still a minority. And, where people think about liability, then they think about, okay, I ought to have a limited company. I just think that's because the easy thing. And I think a lot of consultants, when they start their business, probably don't even think about running it as a partnership, because they just will go to the natural default of setting up a limited company.
And this might not have actually happened, but I'm thinking of questions that might challenge some of that sort of the benefits of flexibility. Because the way you explained it, you can bring people in and out. I guess, does some of that did that ease ever create tension where, I don't know, someone's like, well, I deserve to be a partner, so make me a partner. Whereas in a limited company, you shouldn't, but you could hide behind the complexity and the definitiveness. I don't know, because obviously I've not run one, but was that ever a tension, or the other way, you vote a partner out because it can be done easier. Did that ever create tension where someone's like, well, I bloody want to stay here, and challenges that follow?
Well, I don't think it necessarily makes those decisions easier or more difficult. The decisions themselves, it's the execution of those decisions that's easier. So, if we have a falling out, it's going to be awkward, whether we're a partnership or a limited company. But once we've come to an agreement, we can make it happen nice and easily.
I might move us on, because you mentioned one point there that I had got in my notes to talk to you about, and it had slipped my mind. So you have reminded me, that point about profitably, and scale is something all consultancies want. And to the old sort of cliche, was it revenues, vanity, profit, sanity? consultancies, we all talk in revenue numbers. We talk about being a 10 million, or 20. We rarely talk in profit numbers.
That's convenient, isn't it?
Yeah. it is good. But I think that's also interesting because, something that struck me at the summit as well was Paul Collins said, I think, we should be making net profit. So after everything of about 20%. And I got the sense in the room, there was a mixed reaction to how realistic some people felt that was for their businesses. And again, I'd be really interested in whether this is advice from yourself and the growth experts to members or from your advisory businesses. Kind of actually, why don't consultancies make profit? And where they don't, how can they turn that around?
I'm glad you went back to this topic, actually, because I think it's really, A, it's really important, and B, it's really interesting. I think we went on a journey with profit in the sense that I remember we had 2 years in a row where we were earning 5 or 8% profit. Oh, well, actually, no, it was less than that. In fact, the numbers were £30,000 profit one year and sort of £50,000 or £80,000 profit the next.
And was that before or after partners take? Because a partnership obviously has
that was after partners take, but it was measly. We'd all worked really, really hard, and that was not enough. And we wouldn't have done any distributions at that level because it would have needed to go into fund working capital, as we were talking about. But the following year, we made £800,000 profit, and I think that there's a lot to unpack there, right? So let me just sort of break it down. I think that people don't focus enough on profit, number one. They don't benchmark themselves, their pricing externally enough, and they don't drive initiatives in their business to drive profit specifically enough. And fundamentally, part of our problem was we were targeting a 40% gross margin. And then we were landing at maybe 36, 37, 38%. And as a result, we're making a few percentage points on the EBITDA number. The light bulb moment for me was when I hired someone from an organization that was doing similar types of work to us and targeting and achieving a 70% gross margin. And we were around 37, 38. And that was the trigger. And from there, we then went on a journey to figure out, okay, how do we get from here to there? And a big part of that is something we've already covered a fair bit, which is value proposition. A big part of that is pricing, being bold, ideally selling on value, and therefore moving away from day rates, and having a profit matrix for every single deal that you do. So you know exactly what gross margin you're going to make on every deal, based on obviously a set of assumptions. And the more you invest in your methodology, your intellectual property, your thought leadership, and the impact that you have, and the more that you measure the impact that you have, the more value you're creating your clients, therefore the more you can charge. And the more you charge, the more profit you make, simple. And so if you've got some really strong initiatives around increasing your differentiation, improving your value proposition, and driving your pricing and your value, that's going to really help. And then you've got the discipline around measuring the costs of delivery. So what we did is we documented every single cost associated with running a big transformation program. And that put us in a really powerful position to have an effective conversation with our clients when they were trying to negotiate on price. Because we were essentially able to say, well, these are all the things that you get. If you don't want those things, of course, we can take them out and we can reduce the price accordingly. But that didn't impact the gross margin, right? Because, we were then not delivering that service. You had other aspects like enthusiastic team members, over-servicing clients, working long hours. Oh, but they just asked me to do this little bit extra. And it's only a small bit. It's part of, before you know it, they're working for free. And so educating the team, getting them on board with the fact that they were valuable, their time was valuable. In fact, that's all we had to sell was their time. Therefore, that's what we should do. And yeah, we went from that 40% to 65%. It took us several years to get there. And we went from net margin sort of 3 to 5% to 27% net margin. So yeah.
I mean, the obvious question, you mentioned that 30 to 60% gross margin. Now, some people are probably listening to this thinking, well, does that just mean I need to dump some juniors in, squeeze them? To your point of the people of product, actually is the answer just sweating your people? And I say it provocatively because I don't think it is, but I'm interested how you made, because that wasn't a couple of percentage points. You didn't just shave, or don't do a bit of free work so we get 2%. What were those kind of key things that let you, in effect, double gross margin? And if it wasn't just squeezing people, what was it?
So you've got to, over the time frame, our average day rate went from £600 a day to up to £2,500 a day. So we're talking 10 years ago now. So that was a fairly healthy day rate back then. So the key thing is you've got to get your people to believe in the value of what they're doing and to feel comfortable having conversations at higher day rates or higher fixed price rates, or however whether you're selling on value or selling fixed price deals. But essentially you've got to just charge more. And that by charging more, it enables you to pay your people better, to expect less of them. They don't have to be 95% utilized. Now they can be 80% or 75% utilized, and they can contribute to other aspects of the business. So we would build a matrix for every program. And yes, your more junior people would be higher utilized than your more senior people. And you'd have a cascade of different rates. And maybe you don't make as much money on the really senior people because their utilization is lower. But fundamentally, if that gross margin is coming out at 65% for that program, then you are where you need to be. And we would put in something called a lock profit process. So the person selling the work, the partner or the director selling the work, would have to agree with the director who is going to fundamentally deliver that work and oversee it, that they could deliver it for the amount of days that were factored into that program, and that profit then would be locked, and then that would link into their targets. And if they wanted to move outside of a parameter around their gross margin target, then they'd need my approval. So yeah, a tangible set of steps to drive value, drive the prices up, but not feel like you're ripping clients off. But actually, we had clients that were getting 1,500% return on their investment, literally. Well, you shouldn't be shy of charging them, a decent rate at that level. I mean, we did one risk and reward deal with Carphone Warehouse many years ago, and the day rate ended up being £5,000 a day. But they made that is the example. They made 1,500% ROI on that. They made $9.5 million on that project of net contribution to the business. So do I worry about charging them 470 or what it was? No, I don't. Even though we made £5,000 a day, and that was an 80% plus gross margin.
Well, I think it's a really interesting topic around that, because the phrase is quite simple, that value-based pricing. How do you advise people to bring that to life? Because, to take what you mentioned, like you benchmark against competitors, I hear so-and-so charges this. You could very quickly get to a world where, I don't want to be the one that's charging double day rates. Is it having to do risk and reward? What is it that lets people price on value, and how do you have that conversation with a client so that it is a win-win and it's not you just ruling yourself out because you're too expensive, in kind of inverted commas?
The key is to get under the skin of what it's worth to the client. So whatever change it is that you're going to make in partnership with them, or in terms of the transformation program that you're going to run and you're going to deliver, what is that worth to their organization? And quite often they don't know the answer to that, and you have to work with them collaboratively to figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, it's really hard to sell on value, right? But if you can, then that's your open door. I mean, funny enough, this is a topic. So we're running an event as part of the Growth Network on the 25th of January, and it is all about value pricing, value selling, how to have those conversations, how to use the sort of value definition to avoid clients kicking the can down the road. There's a lot of projects getting deferred at the moment. And by bringing value to the fore and going, okay, your opportunity cost, your cost of not doing this is X million, hopefully, it makes it much harder for them to delay the project. So yeah, I think there's lots that can be done. And I think fear holds people back to some extent because they don't want to lose the deal. They worry about being too expensive. And particularly the teams can often not have that belief and feel that they're worth £2,000 a day or £3,000 a day or whatever the number is. Little old me from Bridgend being sold out at £2,500 a day, it just doesn't feel right, does it? So you need to address that. Mindset's really important aspect.
How did you do that? Because that is, I've heard plenty of consultants say that people come out the big four where they're charged out at £3,000. Like, bloody hell, that never is what I should be worth. And instantly they'll drop their day rate to £1,000, or what you were talking about, 600 quid. Like, I've seen consultancies who go out at that level. How did you get your team to believe they really are worth it? Because if they don't believe, nothing else is going to work from that.
By two things. A, by demonstrating the value that we've created for clients and quantifying that as part of our case studies and sharing that across the teams, but also getting them to understand the economics of running a consulting business. Because quite often they'll just think of their own salary as the cost, when of course it's not. It's the whole marketing team and the product development team, and it's the whole organization and the business. We were in business to make a return. And so I think educating them around both those aspects and the fact that it's not just about their salary, and it's not just about them turning up and putting in an 8 or 10 hour shift. It's all of the intellectual property and knowledge that's been accumulated in the last 17 years that is enabling them to make the difference that they're making in a short space of time.
What should someone be doing today? Because to your point, we're in a inverted commas tough market. The economy's slower. I'm sure everyone listening would love to go from 30 to 60% gross. Is it just the things you've said? Is there an order they should do? Is there a kind of start here and then go to here? What would be the steps that someone should follow?
Well, probably the first step would be to go back over your recent projects and analyze what gross margin you've achieved, and build into your reporting a dashboard, a RAG report, so that you can see all of the projects that you're running and where are they in terms of their profitability against the target. And I would do some pricing benchmarking to understand. And you can do this. It's not, and funny enough, we will include as part of we do an annual survey called the Bench Press survey, and we are going to be focusing on pricing this year, actually. So there will be some data coming out in the new year. But in the absence of that, anecdotally, if you're using associates or contractors, ask them, if they can provide information around that pricing, because it's not often easy to get hold of people's prices. But usually if you leverage your network, you can usually get a pretty good idea on what other people are charging. And, ask yourself, do you want to be top quartile, second quartile, third quartile? What is your value proposition? Are you looking to undercut the big four and be cheaper? Or are you looking to be similar price and loads more value and because you're far better at, sustaining the change and transitioning capability, developing capability in the client? So I think so start measuring it, start increasing visibility of it, and benchmark yourself, and then figure out, what you think that path could look like and what the steps could be, and then start testing it with new clients initially, because obviously it's much harder to change pricing and deals with existing clients. But yeah, I would test it with some new clients and start having a more value-led conversation if you can. If you're able to quantify the value of the work that you do, then start having a more value-led conversation, see where it lands you. Because if you can get a client to tell you that it's going to be worth 10 million a year to make the kind of change you're talking about, then, the question that follows is, what would you pay for that? And does a 10-to-1 return sound appropriate? If you invest £1 million and we give you £10 million back, that sounds like a pretty good deal. In fact, I used to say to people, I'll tell you what I'll do is, would you give me £1 million for me to give you £10 million back? And they said, well, yes, and theoretically, yes, but I'm not going to just give you £1 million. I say, fine. Well, how about we give you the 10 million? Will you give us the million then? And they say yes, right? So, but obviously you can't do too many projects like that, because that's damaging to cash flow, right?
It's an interesting one as well around maybe the areas of consulting, isn't it? Because you might tell me this isn't true or untrue. It's like if you are doing a project in sales where you directly lead to sales, there is quite a linear link.
Yeah.
I remember my consulting days where I worked on an IT systems replatforming that had been going for 3 years and was going, I think might still be going, but was going for at least 3 years more. But to your point, is it more that thought experiment and really uncovering it leads to a client commitment where, again, if someone's listening to thinking, well, Mark, I can't tangibly link pounds to an outcome, or is it about understanding what they can link and talking in that language?
Yeah, I mean, I totally appreciate, a sales transformation program is the easiest one to measure the impact you're having. Customer service transformation requires a little bit more thought. IT, platform implementation, more thought again. But fundamentally, that business will probably have a business case. Why are they implementing it, and what return on investment have they argued that they will get internally? And are they on track to deliver that, or are they 3 months, 6 months behind? And if they're 3 or 6 months behind, what's that costing them on a monthly basis that, they haven't factored in? And so if they were to engage you and you were to get that back on track, what's it worth? So I think people give up too easily in trying to track the impact of what they're doing to a financial number. But that's the chartered accountant in me, I suppose. And just most things can come back to numbers. But again, if you can't, and I remember one director, it was an interesting conversation. I was pretty belligerent about return on investment, and we were doing leadership development, and we ran an event, and I remember this director from, I think it was O2, really senior guy, far more knowledgeable than me. I turned to me and just said, "Look, Mark," I said, I don't care about the ROI. I know my people need leadership development. I don't care about the ROI. I'm like, great, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But you're not the only buyer out there. There were lots of other people that did care about the return on investment and did need to justify it. So obviously we like customers like that.
Well, and I think to your point, and if we had time up, we might talk about how a chartered accountant becomes a salesperson, because our industry is typically very bad at sales. And I think our industry turns our nose up at accountants as worse. So how you became an accountant to a salesman is probably a fascinating conversation for another time. If it's a fascinating conversation for now, stop me, it's worth saying. But even in that example, I guess if someone says, "Mark, I just have a really painful thing and I need you to fix it," the ROI becomes infinite, doesn't it? It's not, there is zero ROI.
Right.
It's, well, how can you take this pain away?
Absolutely. And we've had a few situations like that, for example, where there was a regulator involved and, the company was close to getting closed down if they didn't sort out their customer service because they were getting so many complaints, or getting a massive penalty, which would have, been a negative ROI. So yeah, we were brought in to turn things around in a very short time frame. And in those situations, money's not really the object. It's all about the outcome.
And to your point of that process, and this might be interesting from your own journey, you touched on the fact you went from running a business, you're making 30 grand a year to making 800 grand a year. Now, firstly, I mean, who wouldn't want that? But there is a really interesting, I guess, kind of, you had to have confidence to do that. Because if you're only making 30 grand, if you don't get that next project, you've got a bench where you've just lost 200 grand. How did you and the leadership team get yourselves comfortable with this approach? Because again, it's because you've lived it. I'm sure you've got the answer. Like, if someone's listening, thinking, "I'd love to do that, Mark, but I'm terrified we'll lose the next project." Was it baby steps? You mentioned 600 became 7, became 8. Was it you just were comfortable you might lose a few projects? Like, how did you start that?
So the easiest way to start that is using associates, because then you have a variable cost. And so you don't have a big bench, and you build your bench as you build longer term contracts, and you have more and more associates that are out there billable, and then you start replacing them with permanent members of the team. So, I mean, it's not as straightforward as that, clearly, because the associate can get embedded within a project and it's hard to take them out. But broadly, and we had 300 contractors that we would engage at different times with different specialisms, and a team of only sort of 40, 45, at the point where we're turning over 10 million pounds. So, that was the primary route, I would say, to mitigate the risk.
And then on the crew day rate piece, obviously you talked about the value side. I'm sure that was still a journey. Was that just slowly, was it every project you went out, you pitched a higher day rate? Was it more or less methodical than that? How did you go from 600 to 2.5 grand? Because that is quite a jump.
I'd say it was more every few years we would sort of do a revisit, and we didn't get into the incremental annual inflationary increase, which maybe we should have. But it sounds silly, but it just made the day rate number sound a little bit odd, So you go from £1,500 a day to 1,623, it doesn't really quite ring off the tongue. So I would say every few years we do a pricing increase. And I think when we realized we won a lot of awards actually for the work that we did. So we won about 31 awards in 7 years. So we were clearly doing good work. And then when you find out that you're actually third quartile when it comes to pricing, and there are other leadership development providers or operational consulting businesses focusing in the same sales and service arenas as you are, charging double what you're charging, then, it's a bit of a wake-up call. So yeah, I'd say periodic review and making the shift with new clients, and then slowly but surely the overall business starts to be on the new pricing.
So, Mark, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and obviously we've talked a lot about kind of your advisory journey, your time with Blue Sky, and some of the lessons there. I know I've asked a few times, what would your advice be to someone doing this again? And I guess the really interesting thing is you have done this again, haven't you? You've started the network, And I guess that was your chance to bring all of these lessons in. So we touched on where the network is now. Can you tell me a bit about kind of those early days of the network, kind of how you applied some of those lessons, and I guess how you've continued to apply them as you've grown?
I think the first thing I did was I went out and got a mentor, and I would do that every time. If I was going to set another business up after this one, I would go out and get a mentor. Someone who's been there, done it, bought the t-shirt. So yes, I've built and sold, with my team, a successful consulting business, but I've never built a subscription model, a community, a network of this kind. So yeah, Peter has been fantastic. So that's number one. I would do that, and it's been hugely valuable. The second thing, we talked a lot about, recruitment. Although not great at recruitment, I feel incredibly privileged to be working with George and Luke and Ali. George and Ali been with me pretty much from the beginning. Luke joined not long after, and the four of us have a really strong bond, and we're really connected, and we believe in the value that the Growth Network can bring to members. And so culturally, that feels really, really good. And recently, James and Charlotte and in the future, other members of the team hopefully will continue to be part of that. So people, yeah, really important. Mentorship, really important, and clarity of proposition, I guess, would be the third thing. I mean, I don't take any advisory clients anymore that aren't members of the network, simply because it's the most effective and efficient way for people to learn about how to grow a consulting business, and then they can work alongside a growth advisor or a non-exec, where they can spend the time specifically on the application and dealing with the unique challenges that they have in their business. So the network can deal with 80%, and then the growth expert can support that additional 20%. So yeah, as a model, I think it works, and I feel as passionately about this business as I did about Blue Sky, as I did about selling chicken and chips, Nick.
Well, I'm glad that chicken and chips stayed up there, Mark. It occurred to me with the journey, because I'm referencing a lot the summit, but obviously because firstly it was great, but secondly because there was a lot covered in it. But right now there are consulting firms who are having challenges, and there are firms who are succeeding. And I'm really interested something around the Consultancy Growth Network's journey. You made a point at that summit that you launched, and with all of the investment and time, a bit to your proposition piece, come the start of January, I think it was 2020, you were launching it, but you only had 6 members. And this might be a nice way to test out, firstly, how do you deal when you against adversity, but also proposition. We talked about right at the start, get a clear proposition, test it, and if it doesn't work, change it. I'm not going to say it didn't work, it's obviously worked, but tell me about that period where you'd got your proposition, you only had 6 members. How did you, I guess, keep going with the business, or what did you do to keep yourself motivated, and how did you keep growing? Was it ever a thought of actually, is this the right thing? There's a lot of questions in there, but I'd love you to unpack them.
So it was nerve-wracking, right? We ran 3 big launch events in London, face-to-face events in November 2019, with a view to kicking off on the 1st of January. And as you say, we got 6 whole members. And yeah, we were like, oh, what do we do now? Does this fly? Do we forget it? What's the story? And I'll never forget Peter Chapp, who, as I say, my mentor, said to me, look, Mark, he said, look, if 6 people will buy it, 60 people will buy it. And if 60 people will buy it, then you've got yourself a network, right? So thankfully he'd been there and he traveled that path and grown a 300 strong network. And I believed in him, and I stuck with it. And sure enough, we're now at 140 companies and about 350 people. So he was right, thankfully. What I would say is that the proposition of day one is not the proposition of today. So we have iterated that proposition continuously, certainly for the first 3 years and pretty much into this 4th year, adding value-added services, adding things that matter to our members. I mean, the beauty of having 4 events a year where we're face-to-face with our members, we always run a sort of 2 or 3 minute survey, which essentially is saying, how else can we help you? Are you interested in this? Would you like us to run an awards program? Would you like us to provide a training academy where you can, source consulting skills training and sales skills training for your teams? Would you like, more survey data? What do you want? How can we help you? So we can do that every quarter. And that's what's driven our proposition development over the last 4 years. And now we're probably in a position where we're going to slow that down and focus on execution and improvement, as opposed to adding more layers to the proposition. Because to some extent, actually, some members will say it's quite overwhelming. There's a lot to take on board and a lot to learn. So now it's about, okay, how do we help people follow that path and travel that journey to success?
Well, and I think it's a great example to bring to life what we talked about with proposition at the start and some of those tensions, where we were talking about, does that mean your proposition's fixed, proactive versus reactive? And actually your point there of ask your clients what they want and evolve and adapt with them, because, to your point, we've launched the awards. That might have not been what you thought at the start, but actually if that's what the members want, is what they value, it's just extending that proposition, isn't it? I guess it's almost making the reactive proactive, to try and use the kind of frame you put on earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't emphasize enough how, our members have steered the development of the business without question. And, various ideas like our LinkedIn algorithm hack, which really rings off the tongue, is an option for people to get onto our Slack community and share posts that they're putting on LinkedIn with other members, so that they can comment and like on each other's stuff, give each other more exposure and leverage the power of the network. That was a member idea. That wasn't my idea.
Really, that is, funnily enough, just before this, I was seeing people posting it as well. It's a very active part of the Slack community. So it's nice to know that came from members. And like you say, actually, just that listening sometimes, I guess, comes back to value as well. If you know what people value, it's easier to charge more for the things people want. Whereas if actually the thing you're doing is not the most valuable, you're going to hit a ceiling, aren't you? And I think, Marc, to round us off today, and you touched on kind of all of the new things coming into the network. What does 2024 hold? We're end of 2023 recording this. For anyone listening who is a member or might be interested in it, what can they look at and what can they expect in 2024?
So, a couple of things I've mentioned. We're going to be running our annual survey, which is really insightful. So look out for that and make sure you complete the survey, because if you complete the survey, you get a copy of the report. And a number of our members use that report in their board meetings to benchmark their businesses and set targets. So, really powerful piece of work. So looking forward to that. We're launching an awards program specifically for consultancies. And I should say that you don't need to be a member of the Consultancy Growth Network to take part in the awards. That was an important factor for me. I'm not a judge on the awards. I'm independent from that. But we have a team of credible growth experts that have all built and sold successful consulting firms that will be acting as judges on that awards process. And I encourage people to enter that. It's a great opportunity to get recognition for your teams and to add to your add some credentials to your proposition and why you're different, and to show that you're the best in your market. So the awards, what else have we got? We'll be developing our training academy. We already offer sales skills training, consulting skills training, and there'll be some additions coming along to that. And more events. I think that we'll have our 4 face-to-face events, but the big one in October, which will be the next annual summit. The thinking is that we're going to be focusing on the future of boutique consulting firms. So AI will be quite a big theme for that, looking at the whole life cycle from marketing through sales, through delivery, and how AI can drive efficiency and effectiveness, or not, as the case may be. So that's going to be fascinating. So lots to come in 2024.
Amazing, Marc. Well, thank you for that summary. And we will also at the end in the show notes put a link to the Consultancy Growth Network website. We'll put a link to your LinkedIn as well. So for anyone who's listening, they can come straight there and find it. And then the last questions, and these are wrap-ups I ask all of my guests. Growth experts Dom Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo have answered these. So anyone listening can go and compare your answers. You can compare afterwards. The first one is books. And this is, you've mentioned a few books that have had a really big impact on you. And the question is, what is the book or books that have either impacted you or you found yourself giving to others most often?
So, okay, one's just occurred to me as you were talking, which I did ask very politely my whole team to read, which was the one by Colin Price called Beyond Performance. I think if you're running a consulting business, it's got a huge amount of valuable data in it, so I would highly recommend that. On a more personal level, Super Coach by Michael Neal, I recommend a lot. I just gave that to one of my good friends the other week. If you're trying to figure out your direction, it's got some great questions. It's like a handbook type thing. It's almost like a coaching in a book. It's great. I like a lot of the Michael Neal stuff. And then Michael Singer's Untethered Soul is a really good book as well. all about, it's a bit deep, finding inner peace and that kind of stuff.
Amazing. Three recommendations that have never come on the show before as well. I always like new books, and as Christmas is about to come, I say I'll be reading them. We've got a 2-year-old, so I would love to read all of those. I'm going to buy them on my Kindle straight away and see how far I get through them, but they all sound fantastic. So thank you for that. And then the last one, and this could be a recap of some of the things we've talked about. Some of this I think will be new because of the kind of level we've been talking about in this conversation, but you have 3 people in front of you. One of them is new to consulting. They're an analyst. You might have had, it might have been you at PwC, or albeit in the consulting side. One is, I call it manager level, but kind of middle of the grades before partner. And the final one is someone who is approaching partner. The question is, what one piece of advice would you give to each of them?
So, yeah, some of this will probably overlap with some of what we've discussed. I think the one just starting out in their career, the key thing for me would be that they proactively seek feedback. They take the opportunity to shadow more senior people. They take ownership for developing themselves. That would be like top of the list for me. For the manager, I'd probably say, take your management role seriously. There are human beings that, now that you have some responsibility for, and that you can support, shape, develop, and grow. So, just being a point of escalation because you're a better consultant is not the game. Really think about what you can bring to the table as a manager. What was the third? Was a partner, one approaching partner. So I think the key question I'd be asking myself if I was in their shoes would be, what kind of partner do I want to be? How do I want to be known? How do I want to be remembered? Is there a particular niche of expertise that I want to develop and be known for? Or do I want to build a really strong skill set and be known for great client relationships, or figuring out why should clients buy from you? What are you bringing to the table? Because as I'm sure many of your other guests have talked about, that jump to partner is really about being able to bring in new work and win new clients. So yeah, for me, that would be about relationship development and understanding the psychology of sales.
Fantastic. Well, and I think your book recommendations, I suspect, will help with that, Mark, as well. So thank you for that. And that brings us to the end. I normally ask people how they can get in touch, but I've already said that we will put your website and your LinkedIn on the show notes. So that is how people can. But is there any other way? Is there anyone in the team they should contact? Is there anywhere else you'd point them to?
No, I think if the best spot is the consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And myself or Luke or George, feel free to reach out to. And if you want to know about the network, or if you want to get in touch with me, then really happy to take calls or emails.
Amazing, Mark. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming to Bath. All that's left to say is all the best for Christmas. Have a lovely break, and excited to see what 2024 has in store for you and the Consultancy Growth Network.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful, and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas, and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.